After knowing who Orhan Pamuk is, we found it right to know more about him by venturing onto other writers, onto other people who have gone to meet him, who have interviewed him, to know him personally, to know more about his craft, and to know more about himself. From that, we found one who told us how he writes as a writer, how he writes as an author, and what he wants on his craft. So by metafiction, we now know that it is characterized by the stories within stories. It is where intertexts are happening in order to serve as a basis, in order to compare, in order to contrast, and in order to get to know better certain characters in the novel. And we saw it how it worked in the novel Snow, how it efficiently or effectively worked in order for us to get to know more about Ka. Because there were mentions of writers there who wrote in a different style as his, which from there we could draw a line as to who Ka is as a writer or a so-called writer. Another is that from this structure of stories within stories, he is able to break barriers. Break barriers in a sense that we are taken into another realm, that thinking that whatever we are reading is true, whatever we are reading is something that our mind conceives as happening. But in reality, the thing about metafiction here is that it's just really a work of art. It's not really true. It's just there. But it somehow plays in our minds that it is indeed true. So from there, we could see one style of Pamuk in writing. Another thing which we saw, which we identified, is that he writes in an intelligent, metaphysically preoccupied, in a stringent literary style. So the idea here is simple. He writes parallels in his novel in accordance or in basis into what is happening into Turkey, its uncertain cultural identity, its current status, its current traditions, and etc. And also, it drives link between its themes to the liminal status of his home city, Istanbul. So from here, we could see that the main framework of Orhan Pamuk's novels are basically grounded on the current status of Turkey. He is somewhat considered as a nationalistic patriotic in a sense because he emphasizes the current society that is lib. So from here, we could say that Orhan Pamuk is a patriotic, nationalistic kind of writer because he points out, he emphasizes the current status of his home city, of his home country, and he addresses the problems effectively through the themes in the novels. For example, in the novel Snow, we saw how backward everyone there, how it was being formed, how it was being left behind. From this, we could take a look at how his home city is before. Istanbul before was this old traditional-like city, but today it has come out of that. It has gone its way to modernization. And from there, we could see how Orhan Pamuk sees these progress, and it is reflected on his novels. Another thing that he uses is that he cares about complexity, hybridity, and the richness of everything in his craft, in his work in general. So the point here is we are given facts, we are given a set of characters, we are given sets of settings, and from there we could see how diversified each element is, because that is how he wants to write. But we could focus more on how he pointed out Istanbul in accordance with our previous point, because basically what he keeps on telling on his interviews was that Istanbul is geographically confused. So by geographically confused, we see that there are a lot of sectors in each corner of this place. There are many So from here, we could point out that Istanbul is geographically confused because on his previous speeches, on his previous interviews, he keeps on focusing on this idea under the concept of hybridity and the richness of everything. Because by being geographically confused, its population is basically divided into various sectors. The conservatives and the 40% are looking for westernization. They are more inclined into following the Western ideas. And from here, we could create or we could take a look at the two varying ideologies that are happening in Istanbul. And from this, there has been many conflicts, there has been many arguments that has been created for almost 200 years. So basically, he wants to emphasize these facts so that not only will the issue remain on Turkey, but also it would also be made known to other parts of the world because he could see that it is something that should be concerned about. This is something that all of the world should know because it presents the fact that the East and the West lifestyle, the East and the West tradition are somehow contradicting. Therefore, we could see that how this diversified nation is, how it is being driven by the so-called ideologies ever since the East and the West has arrived to the place.
A short intro on Pamuk. Biography. Born June 7, 1952 in Istanbul, Turkey. He experienced the shift from traditional Ottoman family environment to a more Western-oriented lifestyle. From his childhood until the age of 22, he devoted himself largely to painting and dreamed of becoming an artist. Abandoned the course of architecture in Istanbul Technical University when he gave up his ambition to become an architect and artist. He went on to graduate in journalism from Istanbul University, but never worked as a journalist. At 23, Pamuk decided to become a novelist, and giving up everything else, retreated into his flat and began to write. He has a reputation as a social commentator, even though he sees himself as principally a fiction writer with no political agenda. He is the first author in the Muslim world to publicly condemn the fatwa against Salman Rushdie. Pamuk himself was charged after having mentioned in a Swiss newspaper that 30,000 Kurds and 1 million Armenians were killed in Turkey. Pamuk has been writing novels for 30 years and never done any other job except writing. Orphaned during the Nobel Prize. He is the first one from Turkey to win the award. His answer when he received the Nobel Prize was, "I found these stuffs though." It was a speech in accepting his Nobel Prize. Nobel Prize speech, banquet. Why do you write? What is the point? Why do you give your time to this strange and impossible activity? He said, I write to pursue that old childish happiness And that is why, for me, literature and writing are inextricably linked with happiness, or the lack of it, unhappiness. Literature is about happiness. I wanted to say, about preserving your childishness all your life, keeping the child in you alive. That is why I write, and why I will continue to write. Nobel Prize acceptance speech. My father's suitcase. For me, to be a writer is to acknowledge the secret wounds that we carry inside us. Wounds so secret that we ourselves are barely aware of them, and to patiently explore them, know them, illuminate them, own them, and make them a conscious part of our spirit and our writing. All writers have devoted their lives to their work know this reality. I write because I have an innate need to write. I write to be happy.
Orhan resists the notion of identity as an artifact to be assumed or discarded at will, rather than an untidy organic growth. Growing up in a secular upper middle class family and educated at an American school in Istanbul, he rejects all attempts to impose a single identity on Turkey, whether that of a modern Western state or a Muslim country. He believes in the quotes, "You trust yourself to produce something." The idea that you can read something and it will give you the secret of the universe. And lastly, writing is difficult but is also rewarding. His views on reading novels is that it is like the experience of seeing the sea for the first time in your life. He believes that poetry is something that you are not doing but you are possessed by some outer force. It is moving your hand while you watch with amazement. He believes in Western civilization puts artistic creativity on a pedestal, and according to Kevin E.G. Perry, I turn around sentences again and again. Yes, there is some articulate element, but lots of craft. Now that poor craftsmen of medieval time are discredited, but all Picassos and Turners and Coleridges of history were also craftsmen.